Hi everyone, I'm Dale Smith, aka Journo Dale, and we're here to talk about Canadian politics. All right, we are here this week with University of Waterloo's political science professor Emmett Macfarlane, and I haven't chatted with Emmett for a while, and I figured this would be a good time with the post-election stuff going on, and we had a weird election, and so I figured maybe someone with a poli sci background might give us some interesting things to think about. So, I guess why don't we start with what in your estimation was what you found the most weird in this election as opposed to some of the others?
I mean, I think it's the combination of a new liberal leader in Mark Carney and the Donald Trump factor that kind of brought everything off the rails. Because for about 18 months prior to that, a lot of people saw a conservative win as an inevitability.
Yeah.
The Trudeau government had been long in the tooth, and like most governments, especially at the federal level, that get long in the tooth, they become rather unpopular in this country,
Yeah.
and we have the habit of kicking them out and really remaking what Parliament looks like from a party and even a party systems perspective sometimes. But that combination of Trudeau actually resigning, and then the Trump's threats against Canada really seemed to mobilize not just Canadian patriotism, but mobilize people in a way towards the election that we didn't really see coming. And as we've seen, it came largely at the expense of the NDP.
Hmm.
But you know, that factor is going to be studied for quite a while here. And you see almost diametrically opposed conclusions that people are drawing about how permanent this is. Is the NDP like in long-term danger of not being able to recover? I don't really buy that.
Yeah,
Um,
I
I,
seem to recall in 2015 everyone had signed the death warrant of the Liberal Party. Sorry, not 2015,
yeah,
2011.
2011.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So I mean, I think this. I would caution anyone who, for the same reason that people who saw kind of 2011 and the Orange Crush as like a permanent reconfiguration of Parliament. I suspect whether it's 2 years, 4 years from now, or whether it's two elections from now, that what used to be relatively safe NDP seats might indeed revert back to that, because the really particular context of this election, there's a short term unpredictability here about just how bad things will be in the U.S.,
Hmm.
just how aggressive Trump will continue to be, or whether against Canada and on trade, or whether he's going to get distracted by something else, and of course how Mark Carney performs and
Yeah.
how that new ministry performs as a government. Will the issue matrix of the next election be identical to this one? I don't think anyone should be confident either way.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that also just the NDP factor as well. I think Jagmeet Singh had also kind of run his course as leader as well, and I think there's not enough of that kind of being mentioned in some of these analyses as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's as just an observer of politics, even more so than a political scientist. It's remarkable almost the extent to which Jagmeet Singh was not able to get any attraction, and he really, I think, I think part of his problem was really erring on the side of kind of a almost a traditional small L populist left wing retail politics appeal. He completely kind of missed the boat that Pierre Poilievre really latched onto in
Hmm.
terms of the depth and fundamental nature of people's concerns regarding affordability, the housing crisis, and all of that. I think the yeah, Mr. Singh just didn't seem up to the task relative to a political practitioner like Mr. Polyev.
Yeah, for sure. And I think just kind of going into the election was also interesting that the NDP's numbers didn't go up as the Liberals went down as they would traditionally have in other political cycles as well. So I think that is something that one of those kind of observations that I think people have been glossing over. But yeah, so with that aside, we're also now in the post-election period, and we've also got some interesting configurations happening with the questions about official party status, and also having a leader of the opposition who's lost his own seat. Anything in there that you think bears some scrutiny or some observation?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting double-edged sword situation for the Liberals with respect to the NDP and official party status, because I think there are good reasons why not just the Liberals, but maybe all of the parties should think about letting the NDP have the resources of an official party. And I mean, it's more of a direct problem for the Liberals because, really, if it comes down to a vote on the issue, it's the Liberals plus the NDP that is enough to secure an exemption or a change in the rules or whatever is necessary to kind of grant them leeway. And I think it might be in their long-term interests for the stability of this parliament. They have an antagonist in the Conservative Party, and they have, let's say, an ambivalent third party in the bloc. Making nice with the NDP might be in their long-term interests. That said, the nature of party competition in this country is sometimes so fierce that even people new to the game, like Mark Carney, might be persuaded that being competitive rather than cooperative might somehow be in their interest. So I'm curious to see how they'll navigate that. I haven't seen any quotes in the last couple of days about this.
Yeah, no one's really brought it up because they've been focused on the White House visit. But
yeah, but it's kind of a big deal, not only for what traction the NDP will be able to get in this parliament, because they're going to lose. If they aren't granted official party status with their low number, they're going to lose a lot of opportunities at question period, and I don't know if they'll have any committee representation. And
that's kind of the thing that I've been kind of wondering about as well, is just because like the magic number of 12 is kind of the number of bodies you need to have someone on a committee that's going on at every period, at every point in time. So not having
so
it's
gonna so even if they get it, it's going to be some type of compromise situation. They're not going to be able to have a seat on every committee by any stretch. But that might, I don't think that would even be their biggest concern. It's real, the resources, the lack of staff that result from losing that extra money is huge.
Mm-hmm. No, for sure. And any just observations about the situation the Conservatives find themselves in with needing to have Andrew Scheer be their point person for the next few months?
Yeah, it's an interesting choice for a variety of reasons, given how quickly, how short his previous tenure was. But he brings to it with some experience and a steady hand, and it sounds like it'll be a relatively short period until a by-election. At least Mark Carney has promised not to be obstructionist with the timing.
Yeah,
and so they'll kind of have a bit of a steady hand on the wheel. I'm sure they'll be aggressive as they can in Parliament until really one of the most aggressive parliamentarians in modern history gets back into the game.
Yeah.
And they are not in a particularly weak position. If you think about where they were 6 months ago, that election was hugely disappointing. But if you think about where the polls were about a month ago,
yeah,
they probably breathed a bit of a sigh of relief on election night. And their standing in Parliament is going to let them be quite noisy, and they're going to be able to, as they did in the last Parliament, they're going to be able to leverage the rules to make things a headache for the government, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that I've been thinking about, just in terms of, if the NDP aren't on the committees and they're no longer able to side with the Conservatives for some of the obstructionary tactics, it kind of leaves it up to the bloc having the balance of power in those kinds of situations. So
Yeah.
that could be incredibly interesting, how that
And it
shapes
might
up.
vary, yeah, it might vary by committee. It might vary issue by issue, given the
Yeah.
bloc. The bloc has very discrete interests, and they're not always going to be oppositional, but they're not going to be shy to be oppositional either. So some of the committees might descend into chaos, and other committees might run really well with the configurations we have. Well, it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, no, for sure. So the other kind of post-election weirdness is Alberta, and you've been making some comments over social media around this separation notion and how it's not going to work like some of these Albertans think it does. So I just wonder if you can just kind of expand on that a little bit, and what you
Yeah,
mean by
and
that.
before I get to my kind of constitutional argument about some of this, there's a couple of caveats I want to put out there. First, um, we should recognize that this is nothing like Quebec in '95 or 1980.
Yeah,
The proportion of Albertans who really support separatism is small. That doesn't mean it's not dangerous what Danielle Smith is doing with flirting with this
Mhm.
almost traitorous garbage on her part. And I think most Canadians are probably rightly upset by it. So I don't want to downplay the seriousness of the rhetoric and how dangerous a game Danielle Smith is playing. Um, the other thing I want to say is my argument about the feasibility of an Alberta separation. Some people will see it as risking inflaming the tensions themselves. Just making the argument that Alberta actually can't separate is going to piss some people off.
Yeah,
But the fact remains that when people think in this country about separation, and I'm not talking about necessarily like low information voters, but when people who have thought this through, they tend to think about what the Supreme Court said in 1998 and the Quebec secession reference, and the court came to two important conclusions. One, no province can unilaterally separate,
hmm,
but if there's a clear majority voting on a clear question on the issue of separation, the rest of Canada has a duty to negotiate. Um, and it's important to clarify what that means. A
yeah,
duty to negotiate doesn't mean that separation is going to happen, because the act of separation is still subject to the amending formula and still subject to the say of the House, the Senate, and all provincial legislative assemblies across the country. Um, but another important fact is that the Quebec secession reference is dated.
yeah,
We have evolved considerably in the last 3 decades with respect to recognizing that traditional federal provincial federalism, which is embodied in the amending formula, is no longer a comprehensive account of jurisdiction in our country, that Indigenous peoples have recognized politically and indirectly legally, not yet fully judicially,
hmm,
and that this includes in terms of existing historical and modern treaties, a degree of Indigenous sovereignty.
yeah,
The treaties command respect as part of the foundation of our Constitution, and the courts haven't necessarily breathe full life into that idea of Indigenous sovereignty, but they've breathed enough life into it that I think if today's court were writing their essay on a secession reference, the
Yeah.
reference would end up looking quite a bit different, because it would pay a lot more heed to the fact that Alberta is treaty territory, and that the idea that the duty to consult, that the honor of the crown, that all these important doctrines and principles don't apply to secession is a non-starter.
Yeah.
And in short, that means, frankly, that if First Nations and Inuit and Métis peoples in Alberta don't want to separate, there's not going to be any separation. Yeah, and I have other, I do have other thoughts. First of all, much of what the Supreme Court said in the secession reference was quite particular to Quebec. In terms of when we talk about a right of self-determination, we tend to be talking about a distinct peoples.
Yeah.
We're not talking loosely about a distinct political culture or a regional identity. We're talking about socio-ethnic culture, a civilization, and that simply does not reflect Albertans. Albertans are not a people in the way the Quebecois are a people.
Yeah.
And so I'm skeptical even about whether what the court said about unwritten principles like minority rights truly applies in the same way that it applies to Quebec. You have to also think about Quebec's history. I mean, this is not unlike Quebec, this is not a land that was carved out to speak for a people.
Mm-hmm.
It was an administrative unit carved out of the old Northwest Territories by the federal parliament, in essence.
Yeah.
And so I'm just deeply skeptical of all this from a political and constitutional perspective. And of course, there's no political basis for worry at this point. It's disheartening that a sizable segment of Albertans, in polls anyway, are saying that they would vote for separation. But it's not something that should keep Canadians up at night. I think what we should be concerned about is the complete selfishness of and kind of moral ineptitude of someone like Danielle Smith for churning this up, for not being willing, really. And what it comes down to is a MAGA-like unwillingness to accept the results of a valid election, and that should concern us far more than the prospects of an Albertan separation.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's also the fact that a lot of this is distraction from some pretty government-ending scandals that are happening in the province right now that could very seriously threaten her government the more that get uncovered. So
yeah, and this is what concerns me, right? Like, there's a lot of talk about what does Mark Carney need to do to offer fig leaves to the west, and really they mean Alberta and Saskatchewan, and the federal government's been too intrusive, and the relations have soured, as if it's a one-way relationship and it's all the responsibility of the federal government. We have a bunch of provinces that have really been led by people who are the crybabies of Confederation, who constantly want to shift the blame to the federal government for matters that are in provincial jurisdiction, while constantly demanding a say in matters of federal jurisdiction. So you have a laundry list of demands from Danielle Smith or for Quebec for more say in foreign trade relations and immigration and all these things, while complaining about federal interference in environmental regulation in the energy sector and what have you. Why isn't this a two-way street? And why are we constantly decentralizing the already the most decentralized federation in the world? My next newsletter post is going to be about the need for a centralization movement in this country. And I don't mean centralization in that we should be uploading more formal responsibilities to the federal government. I don't mean literal centralization in that, but a line needs to be drawn on any further decentralization in this country, and we have to start championing the federal level a little bit. I think things have been pushed too far. The centrifugal forces in this country have been pushed too hard, None of these provinces lack any capacity to raise revenue, to address problems. What they lack is serious leadership.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a need for kind of federalist champions in this country. So I'm going to take a stab at a piece maybe next week that is an initial take on this, I think.
Well, I look forward to reading that because I think you're speaking to a lot of what I complain about on a regular basis in terms of the federal government taking all the blame and the provinces not living up to their own obligations. But I think that's a conversation we'll have in the near future. So, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I appreciate it, and we'll talk again.
Yeah, no problem. Happy to be here.
All right. Cheers. And that's everything for this week. Join us again next week for some more Canadian politics. I'm Dale Smith. It's at journo_Dale on Twitter and journodale_no_ on Bluesky. And don't forget to like the video, share, subscribe, and support us on Patreon. Thanks, everyone.